Good morning, guys. Sorry I can't be with you today, but I am recording my lesson just so you'll kind of stay in the loop as we move forward. Friendly reminder that we're going to have that quiz on Wednesday with some triangle proofs, trying to prove congruency, making sure you can identify the 4 types of triangle congruence. So just a little refresher before we get into that do now. We are looking to determine if triangles are congruent using 4 different ways. We've talked about side, 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 angle, side, angle, and on Friday we introduced angle, angle, side. So all 4 of those are fair game for today, and today you're really just going to take some time to practice writing your proofs. I'm going to record a few of them worked through so you can check your work as you go, but we're not learning anything new. We're just putting all of these 4 to use with some proofs and some vocabulary. So we're probably going to use this packet again tomorrow, so hang on to it. Whatever I get up to today is what you're required to get up to. You don't have to finish the packet necessarily. We're going to save a few of them for tomorrow. So let's start off with the do now. I'm going to give you a few minutes to try this do now on your own. So pause the video, try it out on your own, see if you can work through, find some keywords. I would definitely focus on the keyword of bisect because that's going to be super helpful. And then you're given another important piece of information. Okay, your homework for tonight is a worksheet. The worksheet is not going to be due until, I think I made it Tuesday night, but I will double check for you, check on the classroom. But I'll give you the 2 days to work on that. I think we're going to make it due on Tuesday evening so that gives you a nice study guide for Wednesday's quiz. So it's not going to be due tonight, but you might want to start to chip away at it. If you haven't grabbed a hard copy, there's a hard copy in the back of the room right next to your do now. And people that were here on Friday, you should have grabbed a hard copy on your way out. If not, worst case scenario, there is an electronic copy posted as well. So let's get going with this do now. Pause me if you want to try it on your own. Otherwise, I'm going to start talking through. Let's see. So we have the word bisect, like I mentioned earlier, which is super duper important. We know that BD is going to bisect AC. So we always want to figure out is an angle bisector or a segment bisector. And in this case, we have a segment bisector because both the things we're talking about are segments. And if we have a segment bisector, we know that we're going to have 2 congruent segments at the end. But I need to be careful here because a segment bisector does not directly go to the congruent segments. If you have a segment bisector, the first thing you're going to have to state is a midpoint. I need that midpoint first, and then I can get to the congruent segments. So if BD is bisecting AC, I know that there is an important piece of information about P. And I need to talk about how P is going to be the midpoint of this segment. Because if P is the midpoint, I'm going to get the congruent segments that I need. I also notice that AB is congruent to BC. So let me mark that up too. AB is congruent to BC because I'm kind of trying to figure out a game plan before I get into my full proof here. Marked on my triangle, I got the midpoint. The midpoint gave me congruent segments. Then the other given was 2 congruent segments. Now I'm out of given, but I only have 2 congruencies here, so I'm still going to need something else. Hopefully you noticed that there are always 2 freebies given. I can always look for reflexive, or I can look for vertical angles. And in this particular problem, I have reflexive, because both the triangles that I'm trying to prove share side BP. So once I have everything marked up, this kind of gives me a good game plan for what type of proof I'm going to be using. Because if I pull away one of those triangles to get a better visual and take their markups, you'll notice that this is going to be a very specific type of triangle proof. Hopefully you notice that this is actually going to be a side, side, side proof. So I know that at the very end of my proof, I should have a reason of SSS. So let's see if we can set this all up with my statements and my reasons. So I'm going to take all my givens in here, and I'm just going to rewrite them down. I'm going to write the AB is congruent to BC first, just because I really can't do much more with that. And then I'm going to do the bisector underneath, because that's the one I'm really going to build on. So BD bisects AC at P. Okay, and those are all given. Now earlier we said if we have a segment bisector, my next step needs to be midpoint, because a segment bisector by definition passes through a midpoint. So I can always write my reasons first too. If you know that your keyword is a bisector, your reason for this next idea is going to be the definition of a segment bisector. So I know that since I have a segment bisector, P is the midpoint of AC. Why is it the midpoint of AC? Because a segment bisector passes through a midpoint. Okay. Now, since P is the midpoint of AC, it's safe for me to say that AP is congruent to PC. Why is that safe to say? Because of what a midpoint does. A midpoint divides a segment into two congruent segments. All right, and now I've used all my givens, but like we mentioned earlier, we only have two congruencies. So I'm going to need a third one, and that third one is going to come up from reflexive. So I can say that BP is congruent to BP because of reflexive. Now that I have 1, 2, 3 congruencies, I can get to my final proof of triangle ABP is congruent to triangle CBP. Now I always want to make sure that I focus on the correct triangles, so let me just highlight the ones that they mentioned. So they said ABP, so A to B to P, yep, I have that triangle marked up. And then CBP, C to B to P, good. That's the other triangle marked up. So I know I'm good to go with my side, side, side. Good, so hopefully you're feeling a little bit more confident with these. If not, this is all that we're continuing with today. So we're going to see what level you can actually get up to. The proofs are going to get progressively harder as you go throughout the page. So let's start off with the first one, bringing in some parallel lines. So in this first example, it says given AB is parallel to ED. So that's going to be really helpful. And hopefully you have a little alarm going off in your head right now. Because if we have parallel lines, we should be thinking about 3 sets of angle pairs right off the bat. If the proof gives you parallel lines, right away, I want to look for either corresponding angles. I want to look for alternate interior angles, or I want to look for alternate exterior angles. If I could find any 3 of those angle pairs, I know right away I'm going to have congruent angles, which is going to be super helpful to me. I'm also given the word midpoints. There's a lot going on here in this proof. Let's see if we can first focus with the parallel lines. So I'm going to mark up my diagram first, and then I'll get to my 2-column proof. So going to those parallel lines first, I'm just going to highlight them so I get a better visual. You can even extend them if that helps you. I got AB and ED. Now, I always want to look for transversals. So are there any transversals or lines going from one parallel line to the other? So I have one transversal at BE, and there are some congruent angles along there. Do you notice any congruent angles along the transversal of BE? If you said angle E and angle B, you are correct. Angle B and angle E are alternate interior angles here along that first transversal. Do you happen to see any other alternate interior angles? Well, if you looked at the other transversal at AD, there are more alternate interior angles. You actually have angle D being congruent to angle A. So those parallel lines right away gave me 2 sets of angles, which is going to be really, really helpful. Now, there is another way I can do this proof, and some of you may have noticed vertical angles right away. There are vertical angles in here as well, which could be another way of solving this proof, but I'm just sticking with the parallel lines right now. Now, if I had used the vertical angles as well, that does give me 3 congruencies. However, I would have 3 angle congruencies. And we haven't talked about any proofs that are angle, angle, angle for congruency. At this point, I don't know the triangles are congruent, but for extra bonus points, or brownie points, I should say, because I really don't have any points to give you right now, but just for a little bragging rights, I should say, these triangles are not congruent just yet, but what are they? Since I have 2 sets of congruent angles, right now I do know that these triangles are similar. But the problem is not asking for me to get similar triangles, it wants me to get congruency. So since it wants congruency, I need the involvement of at least one side. And I don't have that just yet. So even though I could get all 3 angles to be congruent, that's not going to help me with a congruent triangle set. It's only going to help me with similarity. But can I find one congruent side? Well, I didn't use this given yet. C is the midpoint of BE. Well, if C is the midpoint of BE, that's going to be really helpful because we know that midpoints create 2 congruent segments. So if C is the midpoint of BE, I would know that BC and CE are congruent. And now I have a side that I need. So if I were to pull away one of those triangles and copy its markings to the side, it would help me determine what type of triangle proof I'm creating and if I have enough information. Well, I have 2 angles and a side, so I have some good information here. I just want to see what type of placement it's in. Would this be a angle side angle or an angle angle side? Hopefully you're leaning towards angle angle side because the side is not in between the 2 angles given. So I know when I finish up this proof, it's going to be an angle angle side. Let's see if we can actually put this all together. So I'm going to take all my given. Let me start with just the parallel. AB is parallel to ED. And that's given. Now I'm only going to use one given this time because both of them can be giving me some information. So if they give me 2 different types of information, for example, the parallel lines gave me angles and this midpoint was going to give me some sides, I'm going to put them in 2 different steps just so I can kind of focus on one at a time. So we said earlier that those parallel lines were going to give us angle B being congruent to E. So I know angle B is congruent to angle E. And I also know angle A is congruent to angle D. And those are true because in parallel lines, alternate interior angles are congruent. So again, that gives me 2 congruencies right off the bat. Then I can go to my other given, which is C is the midpoint of BE. And that was just given. But I do know that since C is the midpoint of BE, segment BC is congruent to segment CE. And that's because of what a midpoint does, right? We know that a midpoint divides a segment into 2 congruent segments. All right, so now I have my 1, 2, 3 congruencies. I have triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEC. Let me make sure I have everything I need from each triangle. We said ABC is marked up, DEC is marked up, and I have enough information for angle, angle, side. Remember, I could always write my information on the side of the proof too to kind of stay organized to make sure that I have, 2 angles and a side, or 2 sides and an angle, or all 3 sides, making sure that I have all the information I need to actually wrap up my proof. Good, so that was a little bit trickier because I had parallel lines and midpoint in there. Let's turn the page. And now, like I said, your proofs are going to be leveled up here. So I have some level 1 proofs that are a little bit nicer. And then we can get to level 2, which are a little bit more challenging. So they have either tougher vocabulary words or a few other things to look for. So you'll notice in level 2, it's talking about a perpendicular bisector, which is really encompassing two different ideas. So those proofs are a little bit harder. And then here as well, I have some parallel lines. We have segments bisecting each other, just again, a little bit trickier than before. Okay. And then we do have a tiebreaker, which is really probably the most challenging of the bunch. We're going to save this one for tomorrow. But if you're feeling brave and you want to challenge yourself a little bit, you're more than welcome to kind of get a jump start on that. And I think that's all she wrote for this particular packet. So I'm going to work through a couple of them with you. We have a few more minutes to talk and work through. What I would like for you to do is pause the video just so that you can try them without me. I would recommend just trying the level 1 proofs today. Again, if you're feeling brave and you want to go on to level 2, that's fine. But I'm going to go and talk you through the 2 level 1 proofs. So take a minute now, pause the video, try to set up level 1, 1 and 2 on your own. And then once you've attempted to set them up, you can unfreeze the video and listen to me talk you through. Okay? So take a minute, pause it now. Okay. Welcome back. I'm going to talk you through proof number 1 and 2 here on level 1. Let's see how we did. So with the first givens, I'm going to start to mark up my diagram. I got angle Q is congruent to angle P. And then I have PQ bisects RS at T. Remember, if I have segment bisectors, I have to go to midpoint next. So they're telling me that T is the really important part, and T is going to have to be the midpoint of the second segment, they say, of RS. So I know T is the midpoint of RS. Now, T is not necessarily the midpoint of PQ, and you have to be careful of that. Right now, I only know that T is the midpoint of RS because PQ is cutting RS only, not the other way around. So if T is the midpoint of RS, I only know that these two segments are congruent. I know on Friday a few of you guys were trying to then mark up PT and TQ because it looks like they would be congruent too, but I don't have enough information for that. It doesn't say anything about PQ, only that PQ is the one that's actually doing the bisecting. So now I'm out of givens, but I would still need another congruency. Remember, look for your reflexive and look for your vertical angles. Hopefully, you found your vertical angles here. I have the little bow tie, and if I have the bow tie where the angles are opposite each other, I know that those angles are also going to be congruent. So I get another congruent angle pair on opposite sides of T. Now on Friday we talked about why this wouldn't be reflexive. Remember, these two angles aren't overlapping. They're not physically the same angle, so it's not reflexive. These are known as vertical. So I have a nice triangle proof here. I can pull one of the triangles to the side if I want to get a good visual. And I notice that this angle's marked up, this angle's marked up, and this side is marked up. So I know I'm going to have an angle, side proof at the very end. Let's see if we can set it up. So starting with my given, angle Q is congruent to angle P. There's really not much more I can do with that, so I can throw my other given in here as well. PQ bisects RS at T. Now we said that that's really important because the next idea for a segment bisector has to be midpoint. Don't jump right to those congruent segments. I have to say that T is the midpoint of RS. You need that first because segment bisectors, by definition, just pass through a midpoint. That's what the definition of a segment bisector is it passes through a midpoint. It doesn't do the actual dividing, the midpoint does. But now, once I have the midpoint, I can say that side RT is congruent to TS. And that is because a midpoint does the dividing. A midpoint divides a segment into two congruent segments. Okay. So now I have 1, 2 congruencies. We still needed the third, and we said that our third was coming from vertical angles. So now I can say that angle, now be careful with your naming it because there's multiple angles at T, RTQ is congruent to angle STQ. P. Now I can keep it organized because I noticed that Q is marked up in one triangle and P is marked up in the other, so I'm keeping them in the same place of the names as well, with T in the middle. And I know those are congruent because I can say intersecting lines form congruent vertical angles. So if you see that bow tie is formed because you have intersecting lines. And anytime you have intersecting lines, you're going to get congruent vertical angles, as long as they're opposite each other. And now I have my third congruency, so I can finally say triangle PTS is congruent to triangle QTR because of angle, angle, side. Nicely done. Question number 2 in level 1 is a little bit harder, but still doable. Again, the better you know your vocabulary, the easier these proofs are going to be. If you don't know your vocab, these are definitely going to be more challenging. Let's start off with the idea of perpendicular. So AS is perpendicular to RT, so I know right away that anytime I see perpendicular, I got to think about right angles, right? So I know that wherever they intersect or wherever they meet, I'm going to have right angles, which is helpful because I know that all right angles are 90 degrees. And if they're all 90 degrees, they're all going to be congruent to each other. So that's going to be great. Very helpful because it gives me a congruent angle pair. I also see that A is the midpoint of RT. Well, if A is a midpoint of RT, I know that a midpoint gives me congruent segments. And now I almost have everything I need, but I notice I got 2 freebies. Do I have vertical angles or do I have reflexive here? Are either one of these triangles sharing something, whether it's an angle or a side? And they actually overlap and share side AS. Excuse me. So we have all 3 of our congruencies here. And if I pull out one of the triangles to visualize it, I got the right angle, which I know would be congruent to the other right angle, a marked side from the midpoint, and the reflexive here. So if you can think back to earlier in last week, this is actually going to be a side angle side proof this time. Let's see if you were able to set it up. AS is perpendicular to RT, so this one's going to take a couple of steps. Because if they're perpendicular, the first thing I have to state is that I have right angles. I can't go to the congruent angles right away because perpendicular lines don't make right angles technically. They make don't make congruent angles, they make right angles. So I can say angle RAS and angle TAS are right angles. And I can do shorthand. So I know that those are right angles. How do I know they're right angles? Because perpendicular lines form right angles. Now, since I know that they're right angles, I also know that they are congruent. So now I can say angle RAS is congruent to angle TAS. Why are they congruent? Because all right angles are congruent. Okay, so now I got my first congruency, which is good. Let me move on to the next step. Let me go to midpoint. So A is the midpoint of RT. That's just given. And what do I know is true from that? I know that RA has got to be congruent to AT from here earlier because of what a midpoint does. We know that a midpoint divides a segment into 2 congruent segments. Okay, so now I have 1, 2, 3 congruencies. I need the third. Where was the third? Oh yeah, it was my reflexive. So I can say AS is congruent to AS, and that was reflexive. Now I have my third congruency, and I can get to my triangle proof. So I can say that triangle RAS is congruent to triangle TAS because of side, angle, side. Look at you guys doing a 7-step proof. If you want to put both of your givens together at the beginning, that's fine. I just like to break mine up so that I do one whole idea, get that all done, and then move on to the next idea. You want to make sure you're not forgetting anything. Okay, so those were the first 2 proofs from level 1. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with level 2, stepping it up a little bit, making sure you're feeling confident with your proofs. Make sure that you are able to identify what type of proof it is at the beginning. That's going to keep your proof a little bit more organized as you go through, making sure that you have everything you need as you wrap it up. So if you finish this video and you got through these first 2 proofs and you're feeling confident and there's still some time, take some time to maybe start your homework. Remember, you have that homework tonight. Save this packet for tomorrow. We're going to continue with level 2 then. So I will see you guys tomorrow. Good job today. Bye.